Now, for years, we actually had a picture of a guy, and we called this couple the typical Southern Saddleback Valley resident, Saddleback Sam and Samantha. His wife, Sam and Samantha. And when I used to teach this in the 90s and the 2000s, people started doing Fresno Fred and Atlanta Al and, Dallas Debbie and whatever. It was the typical Saddleback Valley resident of the 1980s. I'm not even going to show you our original target because it's changed so much because the county has changed in 3.5 decades. We now have, in this county of 3 million people, 1 million people who habla español. 1 out of every 3 people speaks Spanish in Orange County. And we have become a very, very polyglot, very diverse church. But as our county changed and as our culture changed, so did our church. And we actually did it intentionally. In fact, we emphasize diversity in this church. In fact, it's a value to us. I'm not going to have time to go into our Saddleback values, but each letter in our name, S-A-D-D-L-E-B-A-C-K, represents one of the 10 values of our church, not a purpose, a value. For instance, the S, I'll just give you the first 2. S stands for Second Chance Place of Grace. That's a value to us. We're a place for people to start over. If you've messed up, if you don't have it all together, this is the church for you. And we really emphasize grace and its place to get a fresh start, a new beginning, a second chance place of grace. It's a value at Saddleback Church. But the A in Saddleback is all-nation congregation. That's a value of our church. We are intentionally multi-ethnic, multinational, we are multiracial, we are multi-generational. We, in this church, have every culture, we have every language, we have every age group, we have economic status, and that is intentional. We call ourselves an all-nation congregation. Why? Because Jesus said, "My house shall be called the house of prayer for all nations." So, we say we want our church to look like heaven's going to look. When you get to heaven, most people are not going to look like you. God loves variety. God loves diversity. And so now at Saddleback Church, this congregation speaks 67 languages. 67. And if you came to the 11 o'clock service here on Sunday, you would see the United Nations. And I don't think, at that service, I don't think we even have a majority of anything. We've got blacks and whites and Hispanics and Asians and Middle Easterners, and this last weekend, and I baptized 12 Muslims from the Middle East on Sunday's baptism. I baptized 2 autistic young preteen boys, which I cried through those. We baptized a quadriplegic man who 4 men brought him in the wheelchair into the baptism pool. And we put him down, and he couldn't speak. And when he came out, he was so overwhelmed with joy, and he couldn't speak. He just looked at me as his pastor with his thumbs up. That's all he could do. Okay. We had people who were watched online who got in their car and came to be baptized, who were watching the service. But it's all-nation congregation. As I was baptizing every kind of Asian and Middle Eastern and African and Asian and Russian and Latin American. And that's intentional. And so our focus, the bigger we got, became much more and more diverse. When we started Saddleback, though, it wasn't that way. Because Saddleback and this area was a pretty homogeneous area. And when I started the church in 1980, everybody pretty much looked like me. They were young and white and drop-dead sexy. I just thought I might pass that one by you, but you didn't buy it. Okay. But God loves variety. And so today, we are an all-nation congregation. And in L.A. and in Orange County, I happen to know, we speak in L.A., well, we speak 67 languages in this church. Orange and L.A. County speak 196 languages. And so when I tell people, when the Bible says go to all the whole world, well, God brought them to us. Go to the whole world means go to your next door neighbor. My next door neighbor's from Syria. And so looking at people around, you have to know who's in your community. Now, here's the point. God says, know who you're fishing for. You've got to know, the more you know about them, the easier it is to reach them. When you've got a target, if you're shooting a gun, the clearer your target, the easier it is to hit them. Hit that target. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I don't have time for this. Demographic study. Are you kidding me? Cultural study, geographic study. I don't have time for this. Can you imagine a photographer who goes out and he's taking pictures and he goes, I don't have time to focus. Just click, 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 click. I don't have time to focus. I'm just taking pictures. Not even focusing. He doesn't have any good pictures. Or how about a deer hunter who goes up onto the hillside and shoots into the valley and goes, sure hope I hit something. No, you got to focus. You got to know who you're fishing for. Here's the second principle of Jesus. Learn to think like a fish. In fishing for men, you need to learn to think like a fish. It helps to understand their habits and their preferences and their feeding patterns. Certain fish like smooth, still water. And so if you're going to reach those fish, you got to go to smooth, still water. There are other fish that like rushing rivers. They want to jump up the rushing rivers. There are some fish who are bottom crawlers, and you're going to use a whole different kind of technique than if those who are hiding under rocks. There's some fish like to hide under rocks. You got to know your people. You got to learn to think like a fish. So if you're going to reach unbelievers, you got to understand how they think. This is what made Jesus so effective. Go and study how often in the Bible it says Jesus knew what they were thinking. I've written just some examples there. Matthew 9, Matthew 12, Mark 2, Luke 5, Luke 9, Luke 11. There's at least 5 examples where it says Jesus knew what they were thinking. Well, when you know what people are thinking, it's a whole lot easier to reach them. In Matthew 10, verse 16, Jesus says this, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Now, what does that verse mean? He says you need to be strategic, and you need to be strategic in your thinking. He says, I want you to be as wise as a serpent, and I want you to be harmless as a dove. Usually the church is only half of that verse. We're as harmless as a dove. But we're not always as wise as a serpent. We're not always strategic. Now, here's the problem, and I want you to write this down. The number one problem in evangelism is this. The longer I am a believer, the less I think like an unbeliever. The longer I am a believer, the less I think like an unbeliever. And the problem with that is that I don't even think like a believer. I think like a pastor. That's 2 generations removed. So I'm going to have to either learn a new way of thinking, or I'm going to have to change what I'm doing. A missionary can pray all he wants and can preach all he wants, but he still has to learn the language. Can you imagine a missionary who moves to Papua New Guinea and has the gospel and has plenty of Bibles and has all the training materials and has the financial backing to support him, but never learns the language? Well, they're not going to reach anybody. You got to be able to speak their language, and you got to be able to think like they think. If you're going to reach fish, you got to think like a fish. Colossians 4:5, look on your outline, says, be wise in the way that you act toward those who are not believers. Are you strategic? Are you wise in the way you act toward believers? And as I said, the problem is the longer I'm a believer, the less I think like an unbeliever. So stop saying people are closed to the gospel today. Please, just stop saying it. And start saying, how can I get on their wavelength? And there are brand new wavelengths we didn't even have 5 years ago. Pokemon Go wavelength. Candy Crush wavelength. Social media wavelength. There are all kinds of channels out there that God did not create. God did not create the internet for pornography. He created it so we could share the gospel. God did not give us the printing press for pornography. He gave it so we could share the gospel. The first thing printed on the printing press was the Bible. Every time God's message has been put into new technology, we have revival or reformation. And we've just been given a whole new technology in your lifetime, in my lifetime, that nobody had before that, called the internet and social media. You know, before I started Saddleback, I was told, you know, you can't reach affluent people. It's impossible to reach affluent people. They have all their needs met, so they have no needs, and you just can't reach them. And I want to say, who says? They have needs too. The poor have needs, the affluent have needs, and everybody in between have needs. You just got to know what those needs are. You got to learn to think like a fish. Now, how do you do that? How do you learn to discover the mindset of believers? 3 words, write this down. Talk to them. Real hard. Talk to them. Here's the problem. If you're a staff member in a church, you spend all your time with believers. And the longer you spend with believers, the more afraid you become of unbelievers. That's why the longer you're a Christian, the less evangelistically effective you become. You know who are the most effective people at evangelism in your church? The brand new believer. Because all their friends are unbelievers. They're not afraid of them. They were their friends yesterday. But you're afraid of them because you spend all your time with believers. And this is a problem as a church ages. There are people in our church, they're good people, godly people. They've been here 20, 30 years. But they're evangelistic ineffective because after 30 years of being in this church, they have already witnessed to their friends 2,000 times. They've invited their friends to church 32 Christmases in a row. Those who came and became believers. Those who haven't. They're not going to. And they're out of people because they're not out there making friends with non-believers. So the longer you're a Christian, the more ineffective you become at evangelism unless you intentionally learn to think like a fish. Now, how do you discover the mindset of unbelievers? You talk to them. Now, I've written this down on your outline. If you don't ask the right questions, you won't get the right answers. If you don't get the right answers, you won't develop the right strategy. And if you don't develop the right strategy, you won't get the right results. Let me go back and tell you the story of the beginnings of Saddleback. I told you that when I was still in Texas, I studied the 100 largest churches in the United States. And I asked a serious question. I was looking for what makes a strong, healthy church? And you know what I discovered after studying the 100 largest churches in the United States? They had nothing in common. I mean, as I told you, they were doing it opposite, different ways. God uses all kinds of churches in all different kinds of ways. But I did find 2 common denominators in every really healthy church. One was the leadership stays, longevity. They don't keep changing pastors every few years. A church that gets a new pastor every 3 years is like a family that gets a new daddy every 3 years. Kids are going to be schizophrenic. Who do we trust? If you stay, and as I said, you have integrity, people learn to trust you. They'll follow you into hell's squirt guns. Why? Because you were there for them. You were there at their bedside. You were there at their graveside. You were there when there was the marital crisis. You were there when they got sick. And you put in your dues year after year. When you build your life into their lives, then they want to follow your vision. But longevity is one of the things. The faith factor is another. Leaders are not afraid to believe God. But what I did is I got out a map of the whole world, and I put it up on our wall when we were in this little shack that we were living in Fort Worth. And I said, God, we'll go anywhere in the world if you'll just let us spend our whole life in one place, because longevity is a key factor for a healthy church. So just let me go to one place and stay there. I want people to go, oh, that's just old Pastor Rick. He's been there 30 years. So I began to pray about it. And God shut it down and said, you're going to go to the United States. I told you how disappointed I was in that. I circled every major city outside of the South on this map of the U.S. Detroit, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, Denver, Albuquerque, Phoenix, Seattle, San Francisco, San Diego, Orange County. I didn't circle the South because I was going to school in the South, and I thought, man, there's a church on every corner here. I'll just go where people aren't willing to go. And when we narrowed it down to this area, I remember, okay, that's where we're going to go. I knew nothing about the area. I had never seen it. And I'm in Texas. And I wrote a letter to Herman Wooten, who was the district superintendent or the director of missions or the area supervisor for Baptist churches in Orange County, because I was going to a Baptist seminary. And I wrote him this: Dear Mr. Wooten, I'm a young seminary student, and I'm thinking about planting a church in Orange County, and I've studied this area called the Saddleback Valley. Sounds interesting. What do you think about the Saddleback Valley? I'm not asking you for money or for support. I just want to know, what do you think about this area? In the providence of God, this man, Herman Wooten, had heard somehow about this young seminary student, was interested in maybe coming to California, and he wrote me a letter. And he said, Dear Mr. Warren, I hear you're thinking about planting a church and maybe even coming to California. Have you ever considered a place called the Saddleback Valley? And our letters crossed in the mail. I was like, whoa, this is kind of weird. I put my letter in the mail one day, and the next day I went out to the post office and got his as he was getting mine. I saw the postmark on it, and I opened it up and it said, have you considered the Saddleback Valley? And I burst into tears. Only God can do that kind of thing. So I thought, okay. So I cut school for a week, and I brought Kay out here, and we came out here to Southern California, and went up on a hill, prayed over the area, memorized a bunch of bunch of road names and parkway names, and looked over the area and said, okay, this is where we're going to spend our entire life. I will live and die in one location, God willing. Then once we got here, we moved on January 1, 1980. And we came across Southern California, across from Texas, with a U-Haul truck, being wealthy seminary students. Had about $1,000 to our name, which was to keep us moving. When we got here, we didn't have any money for a rent the first night. In fact, we didn't have enough money for a motel the first night we got here. We literally moved on faith. And we were going to just sleep in the truck. We actually ended up going up to Anaheim and spending the night in a pastor's home that night because we didn't even have money for a motel. But I'll never forget coming in on Highway 10 and coming into the San Bernardino Riverside area, and it was jam-packed at rush hour traffic, 8 lanes on either side, and nobody's moving. I don't know why they call the slowest time of the year rush hour of the day, but because nobody's rushing anyway, it's just jam. And I'm looking here and I'm sitting here. Now, remember, I was raised in a little village of 500 people. And I'm a country boy. And I looked out and I saw 16 lanes of parking lot on the freeway. And I go, God, you got the wrong guy. What in the world am I doing here? And I really had doubts, and we haven't even moved in yet. We got here at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I went in, I found the pulled off El Toro Road, found the closest real estate office I could find, walked in. There was one guy in this real estate office at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. All the realtors had gone home, and his name was Don Dale. I said, Don, my name is Rick Warren. I'm 25 years old. I'm here to start a new church. I don't have any members. I don't have any building. I don't have any salary. I don't have any money. And I need a place to live. And he did what you just did. He started laughing. He said, well, let's just see what we can do. Where God guides, God provides. To make a long story short, within 2 hours, he'd shown us a condo, one little tiny apartment. I said, we'll take it. He called up ugly lime green 70s carpet. He called up the owner, got us the first month rent-free and nothing down. He said, I don't know why. He said he knew the guy who owned it. He goes, I just trust this guy. He says, I think he's can be counted on. And so within 2.5 hours, when we were driving over, I said, hey, Don, do you go to church anywhere? He said, no, I don't like church. I said, great, you're my first member. I said, I'm going to build a church for people who don't like church. He goes, okay. So we got that condo. We walked in, looked at it, we'll take it. We signed his papers on it, got the first month rent-free, and that man became the first member of Saddleback Church. First guy I met. He's still a member here, 36 years later. And so we started a week later, Kay and I and our baby daughter, 4-month-old Amy, and Don and his wife and his little girl, and one other person I'd found. We had 7 people, and that's how Saddleback started. So then I said to these guys, you guys, it's real obvious, I don't know this area at all. I need to learn to think like these people. I'm not from this area. It's a higher standard of living than I ever grew up with. I grew up in a poor rural area. So I'm going to have to just talk to people. So for the next week, that little group of us grew about 15 people, and for 12 weeks, we went door to door all day talking to people. And I gave everybody a little clipboard, and I said, you go to the door, and these are the questions you ask. And they're there on your outline. They've been used by several thousands of churches since, but this is the personal opinion poll that I would encourage you to take. And you could adapt it and write in your own questions, but I would walk to the door, and the first thing I would say is, hi, my name is Rick Warren, and I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to invite you anything. I'm not here to convert you anything. I'm just taking an opinion poll. I've got 5 questions. There are no right or wrong answers. It'll take about 90 seconds. Can I have 90 seconds? Now, by saying that, I just watched the tension drain out of them because I'm not trying to invite them even to church. I'm just trying to get their opinion. And I'm only going to take 90 seconds. So here were my questions. Number 1, are you currently active in a local church? Now, I didn't say member because people say, oh, yeah, I'm a member of the Catholic Church or a member of Jehovah's Witness or whatever. Are you currently active in a local church? If they said yes, I said, God bless you. And I politely excused myself and went to the next home because I'm not interested in the opinions of Christians. Jesus said, I came for the sick who need the doctor. I wasn't interested in the opinions of Christians. And so when they said, yes, I go to church, God bless you. Keep going there. And I wouldn't even ask them the next 4 questions. Thank you. When I'd find people say, no, I don't go to church, I say, fantastic, that's great. You're just the kind of person I want to ask these questions of. Let me ask you 4 questions. And here they were. What do you think is the greatest need in the Saddleback Valley? Now, I wrote all the answers down. Now, a lot of things they said I couldn't do anything about, but it got them talking. You know, taxes are too high, or the roads are too clogged, or gas prices are too high. I just wrote down whatever they say. What do you think is the biggest need? Then I asked the question, why do you think most people don't attend church? Now, this is a psychologically safe question. I could have said, why don't you go to church? And they said, well, it's none of your business. That's offensive. But if you say, why do you think most people don't go to church? 9 times out of 10, they're going to give you their reason anyway, but it doesn't put them on the defense. Does that make sense? So you just say, why do you think most people don't go to church? And I wrote them all down. Okay? Then the next question was, if you were looking for a church, what kind of things would you look for? And I just wrote those down. You know what I discovered? That what most unchurched people were looking for in a church was not at all what we were offering. I didn't have one person say, I'm looking for great choir music, accompanied by an organ. Not one. The stuff that they said they were looking for, we weren't even in the same universe as that. And then the last question I asked was, what advice would you give to me? How can I help you? I'm planning on starting a new church to be a benefit to the community. How could I help you? What could I do? How could I serve you? You know what the number 1 answer on that was? I have no idea. Because the average non-believer hasn't a clue how the church could be a benefit to your life, to their life. And so they don't even know. So there's already a gap there. Now, when I asked, why don't you think most people go to attend church regularly? The 4 biggest reasons, here they were. You might write them down if they're not already down. They may be already written down, yeah. The first one was, sermons are boring and don't relate to my life. Okay? So I thought, okay, whatever I do, I got to say something on Sunday that helps people on Monday morning. Then the second one that said, members are unfriendly to attenders. They said, you know, when I go to church, it's like a clique. Everybody knows when to kneel, when to stand up, shout down, sit, or whatever, fight. They say, we don't know all of the lingo, and we don't know what to do. We feel let me put it this way. Have you ever gone back and walked across your high school campus as an adult and felt how weird it was? When years ago, you were the big person on campus. You felt very comfortable there. But now you feel like everybody's looking at you. That's the way a non-believer feels when they walk to a church. Everybody's looking at me, and I haven't the foggiest idea what to do. I don't know if I'm going to do the right thing or embarrass myself. And members are unfriendly to visitors. A lot of churches say, we love people. What they mean is we love the people who are already here. Doesn't mean they love new people. Okay, the third biggest problem is there's too much emphasis on your money. This was a big thing for a lot of non-believers to say, the church is more interested in your wallet than you. And I said, okay, we got to figure out how to lower that barrier and say, okay, if you're a guest, a visitor, please don't give. That's our policy. The fourth one was the children's programs and the child care are weak. We worry about the quality of child care for our children because there are a lot of young couples in this area. Now, I looked at those. Those are the four biggest reasons in this area that people said they didn't go to church. None of them are theological issues. They're all sociological issues. None of these, I didn't have a single person tell me I'm an atheist. I'm sure they're out there, but nobody said that to me. Most people, they're not against God, they just don't like church. They find it irrelevant, cliquish, focused on the wrong things, and I don't know if I trust my children to you. So what we learned was this. Most unchurched people are not atheists. They're just turned off and too busy. They're turned off and they're too busy. But by spending 12 weeks before I even had a first service, just listening to people, I began to learn the mindset of these people. This takes time. I know people who want to send out robocalls to do this. People have tried to do this with emails. It's nothing like you just going and listening to people, having a conversation. If you don't like people, get out of the ministry. Okay? Okay? If you don't like people, you shouldn't be serving in a church. If you want to send everybody an email instead of making a phone call, or not showing up on their doorstep, well then do something else. Now, I took all that information from 12 weeks and I summarized it and I wrote an open letter to the community. And on the next page, here's the letter. This is how we targeted, how we learned to think like the fish in this area. And this is written March 20, 1980. And we sent this 10 days out before Easter. And it said this: "Hi, neighbor. At last, a new church for those who've given up on traditional church services." That's called a positioning statement. And right there, I'm telling you who we're going after and who we're not. Let's face it, many people aren't active in church these days. Why? Too often, sermons are boring, don't relate to life. Many churches seem more interested in your wallet than in you. Members are unfriendly to visitors. I just listed the 4 things they had told me they didn't like. Marketing attacks the objections of the people you're dealing with. Do you think attending church should be enjoyable? Well, we've got good news for you. Saddleback Church is a new church designed to meet your needs in the 1980s. We're a group of friendly people who've discovered the joy of the Christian lifestyle at Saddleback. You'll meet new friends and get to know your neighbors, enjoy exciting music with a contemporary flavor, hear positive, practical messages which uplift you each week, and trust your children with the care of dedicated nursery workers. I just answered the 4 biggest complaints. Now, friends, that letter right there, we hadn't even had a service yet. That entire thing's written on faith. This is speaking it into existence. Or going way out on a limb, one or the other. I hadn't even had a service yet when I'm writing this. Why not get a lift instead of a letdown this Sunday? Invite you to be our guest at our first public celebration, Easter Sunday, Laguna Hills High School. If you don't have a church home, give us a try. Discover the difference. All right, that little group of 15 people, we hand-addressed and hand-stamped 15,000 letters. Mailed them out 10 days before Easter. We went $6,000 in debt for that mailing. Well, say, how do you start the church? With our credit cards. I thought I should do a commercial. MasterCard built my church. Priceless. All right? So we mailed this out and invite them to come on Easter. Now, 10 days early. Some people misread this letter and came a week early. We had a trial run service. The week before Easter, I said, I'm going to take the 15 of you down to Laguna Hills High School, and I'm going to preach like there are 50 people here or 100 people here or whatever. And like we're just starting out. And so next week when people show up, it'll look like we know what we're doing. We've had a 1 week of practice. So we went down and we rented the high school a week early for a trial run service, but some people misread this letter, came a week early. And we had 60 people to trial run, and 6 people got saved. So I wanted to say, sorry, no, you got to come back. Nobody can be saved till next week. That's when we officially start. But I didn't. We let them get saved on that week. So the next week, 205 people show up. I told you a week after that, it dropped about 100, 115, and Saddleback Church was born. It's easier to turn a crowd into a core than a core into a crowd. But we obviously had hit our target. Now, when we got to the service, man, we had hit our mark because everybody there was a non-believer. It was like preaching to a Kiwanis club. I got up and said, everybody, let's sing this song. Nobody knew the songs. Nobody knew the song. Everybody, let's open our Bibles. Nobody had a Bible. Okay, I said, let's all pray. And it was the weirdest thing. It was totally out of my background. Not a revivalistic background at all. I had totally hit the target. Non-believers. By learning to think like an unbeliever. And in the first 10 weeks of Saddleback Church, over 60 people gave their lives to Christ. And we were off, and we were running. And so we built a church on unbelievers. I actually had non-believers helping me plan the first service. In that first little group of 15, I had just met some people. Hey, come on, help me start a church. They weren't even Christians. Terry Jacoby, she and her husband's named Animal. And yeah, they were in charge of the children's ministry. I'm not kidding you. They weren't Christians, okay? And there were other people in there. These people were not believers. I said, okay, you're going to take the offering, and you're going to do children's church, and you set up the refreshment table. And I had non-believers. What you start with, it's easier to reach. There was actually a church, very kind church, up in Anaheim, a Southern Baptist church, that offered to send about 40 of their members down to help start Saddleback Church. And I said, thank you, but no. You can send money, but because the kind of people in that church were not the kind of people we were trying to reach. Does that make sense? And a lot of them had Southern accents. And I go, there's plenty of those churches around. So it's learning to think like an unbeliever. And that is how we got started.